I don't think you're supposed to see the altar behind me, either of them. This has been something that's been happening to me for a considerable amount of time. I usually keep more than one altar. Because I am not formally grounded in a congregation, and I have been denied any capacity for engaging any formal worship, as well as any formal communion, for going on 10 years now. I do what I can, and I am still, as I always have been, committed to interfaith dialogue. I don't like it when the altars appear on camera. I don't like when cameras are in holy sites. I don't believe in telecasting. I don't believe in filming the worship services. It's something that's very distasteful to me. Sometimes I even get angry, as if it is offensive, as if it is unholy. And then there is the implications of what it means to be in a situation where some state apparatus intends and enforces some surveillance on services, worship services. Now, I will say, if I were in leadership in a congregation, which at one point I was, and the mayor or an appropriate diplomatic body working in and on behalf of the local political subdivision were to come and say that they were concerned that organized crime was using houses of worship as a front, and they were requesting transcripts, written transcripts, or dictated transcripts of worship services in order to compare with allegations of any number of crimes that might be connected to organized crime, I would cooperate. But the idea that you're supposed to have a camera in your worship centers, especially while you're worshiping, it is invasive. It's an insult. And it brings up the consideration of the actual intent. What do you want? Why do you have to watch people at worship? What is lacking in your life that you have to play voyeur to a holy service? If you're a participant, if you're concerned about crime in the service, there's nothing that I've ever conceived of that's actually reasonable about surveilling a worship service. Obviously, somehow inherent in it to me is a spiritual need that the voyeur has, that they attempt to acquire through a secret ritual of humiliation of that which they observe. And I say that, not who. But alas, the altars are apparent behind me because I don't want you to see the cot where I sleep. You're not infiltrating my pet bed. Now we are where we are. I'm going to read something. I'm just going to read it as it's written, and then perhaps provide a brief commentary or not. Response to Iqbal Ahmed's Terrorism, Theirs or Ours. On political terror and private terror. Considering Ahmad's comments on the use of private forces to accomplish the ends of terror, including state sponsored terror, the notion of the first primary motivator being that of being heard does not have the same utility for a smaller politically disadvantaged group attempting to obtain some notice for their cause as a private group employed in the service of terror for state-sponsored actors. Their campaign is more of a campaign of silencing any opposition, and the terror visited becomes more of a symbolic hit than any sort of literal blow. Taking a sacred object and profaning it at a certain time that is of religious significance often is an act of private terror employed against those who may operate or believe in the significance of religious observance or symbols. The idea to make an example of as a means of imbuing that image or symbol with references to feelings or thoughts of terror, including retaliation for the act of profaning. In this matter, it is not so much for the terrorist him herself to be heard, as much as it is to compel a response from another, in relation that is then listened to for confirmation or justification for supporting further state sponsored terror against that individual or group of individuals. Additionally, terrorism does not necessarily ascribe to a direct target to accomplish its goals. Often, terrorism is most successful when it compels someone else to move forward on effecting its agenda. A gangster's threat of fear of economic harm by requiring someone that is working in an illegal labor racketeering syndicate related to, say, a pension fund scam that benefits a criminal syndicate of drug dealers that also traffic arms can compel that person who is being extorted into cooperating with, say, detonations of remote weapons targeting an individual or group of individuals who are the intended targets of the terrorists themselves. In this case, terror is visited twofold, or manifold depending upon the nexus of the terrorist network, and that not only is the person being extorted into cooperating with the weaponization or detonation of a weapon used in the act of terror being terrorized, but so too is the community or individual targeted by the weaponization or detonation of the weapon employed. In this case, what might be considered an otherwise legitimate enterprise is terrorized into cooperating with visiting terror upon another, or be victimized by the terrorist him herself. This silent terrorism is among the most important components to fighting terrorism and not just to expose the sleepers. It is also important because ultimately this is what sustains the financing of these terrorism syndicates that are motivated by and employed to financially destabilize a competitor. Now, I first wrote this a considerable amount of time ago. It's hard to say, really. There was no specific motivation in the moment. It wasn't as if it was a request. I'd recalled learning about this individual from somebody else, and I happened to find some of his writings. And the one writing I found at the time was that one. It's a brief essay. And from reading that, this is what I understood its relevance was to what I was experiencing at the time. I wrote this in either late 2017 or early 2018. I think it's very applicable right now. I think it is a very specific and accurate analysis of what is accomplished right now in terms of the terrorism that is running concurrent to this biological warfare regime. And I say it that way, a biological warfare regime. Its application and implementation is being effectuated by people who present themselves, or rather impose themselves, as state actors with a concept backing them that they are constitutionally not only permitted but almost duty bound to engage in the activities that are unfolding as part of this regime. There does not appear to be any sensibility, and by refusing to identify it as a biological attack or electronic warfare, manipulating biological weapons, or as cyber terrorism that is being effectuated as a comprehensive electronic warfare campaign in what might well be a multi stage effort at a comprehensive campaign of warfare, or if It is being conducted in accordance with considerations of redistribution of human capital as part of a trade war. All of those would be ways that this could be contextualized that would actually allow for people in society to be able to understand what the true threats were and how to respond. But that is not what's happening. What's happening instead is an effort to compel us to cede our capacity to even observe our own environment and to cede that we have any capacity or ability to say no to being forced to cooperate with crime. We're informed of what the crimes are, and then we're informed that in order for us to do something, well, you have to do the crime. What's the purpose? What is the purpose except to use terror perpetrated by the state in order to effect what? And even in this manner, the state is merely one stage of the visitation of this sort of terrorism that ultimately we need to internalize. That we are the terrorists and that somehow it is justified. That somehow something else that has not been represented politically, including perhaps friendships we had, appreciations we had, communities we had that were victims of actual terrorism of one form or another that was allowed to be identified as terrorism, or defamation and slander by being unduly and disproportionately identified as terrorists. And somehow now we're justified in stepping into the role ourselves. This is what I see, and this is what I've been experiencing. But at the same time, I believe there is, and I have for over a long time, as I've said publicly, there is just cause for war. But the problem is, during war, somebody keeps track. Somebody keeps track of what you do and how you do it. We're in a very critical stage in the history of warfare right now. Not just because of the nuclear age. We're at another level. It's almost a war of consciousness. It's consciousness warfare. A battle for actually maintaining our own consciousness in the course of the manners in which the weapons of this war are being wielded. Someone keeps track. If nothing else, I do.